The loss still stings when you look at the final score, especially because for most of the night, it genuinely felt like Golden State had control of the rhythm. The energy was there from the opening tip, the ball movement was sharp, the defensive rotations were active, and there was a real sense that the Warriors were dictating how the game was being played. Even when the momentum swung back and forth, it never felt like the team lost its composure. What ultimately changed everything was overtime, when the legs just were not there anymore. You could see it in the closeouts, in the jump shots coming up short, and in the way possession slowed down. Normally, that kind of finish would be frustrating because it raises questions about endurance and whether a team is truly built to survive deep playoff runs. But this was one of those rare games where the bigger story was simply an individual performance that took over the night. Scotty Barnes put together one of those stat lines that almost forces you to shake your head in disbelief. This was not just a good game or even a great game. It was the kind of performance that warps everything around it. He controlled the glass, he initiated offense, he punished mismatches, and he made every big decision at the right time. When a player finishes with 23 points, 25 rebounds, and 10 assists, there's only so much a defense can realistically do. It was dominance in every phase, and it shifted the narrative away from what the Warriors did wrong and toward acknowledging what the Raptors did right. On top of that, Toronto had multiple players contributing offensively, with 3 different scores crossing the 20-point mark, which meant Golden State could never fully load up on just one option without paying for it elsewhere. From the Warriors' side, there were still positives worth paying attention to, even in a loss. Draymond Green was aggressive offensively and hit the 20-point mark. Jimmy Butler was right there with 19, and Stephen Curry once again carried a massive scoring burden. Curry was pushing toward 40 points and logged over 40 minutes on the floor, which tells you everything about how much responsibility he was carrying. That kind of workload can win you games in the short term, but over the course of a season it raises concerns. You want to see moments where he can breathe, where someone else can initiate offense and keep the pressure on without him having to constantly create something out of nothing. That is why the rotation decisions stood out so much in this game. With several players unavailable, including Jonathan Kuminga and Tracy Jackson-Davis, the bench leaned heavily towards smaller lineups and guard-heavy combinations. Outside of Al Horford, there was not much size to work with, and that showed especially late in the game when rebounding and interior defense became critical. The Warriors still managed to stay competitive through 4 quarters, which says something about their effort and execution, but once overtime hit, the lack of depth and size became harder to hide. It is also worth noting that Horford not being available in the following matchup only adds another layer of concern, because it limits flexibility even more. Despite all that, this was not a game that should send anyone into panic mode. Sometimes you run into a performance that is simply special, and no amount of tactical adjustment completely solves it. Barnes was everywhere, and he dictated the terms of the game. Those nights happen over the course of a season, even to teams with championship aspirations. The key is how you respond afterward, and that response has to come quickly with another game on the schedule. The focus immediately shifts to the next opponent, because dwelling on a loss like this does not accomplish anything. What has made things more complicated, though, is the noise surrounding trade rumors that refuses to die down. Ever since the matchup against Dallas last week, there has been constant chatter linking Anthony Davis to Golden State, and it remains one of the most confusing storylines floating around the league. The timing alone makes it strange, considering Davis exited that game after just 11 minutes. Yet the speculation continues, as if durability is not a major part of the equation. The idea that the Warriors should give up significant pieces and draft capital for a player who has struggled to stay on the floor simply does not line up with reality. Availability matters, especially in the current landscape of the league where roster depth has become more valuable than ever. A big body only helps if that body is actually playing. Davis can be impactful when healthy, but the concern has always been how often you can rely on him night after night. When you factor in contract considerations and the possibility of extension demands, it becomes even harder to justify the move. The league has shifted, And teams are far more cautious about committing massive resources to stars who cannot consistently stay healthy, particularly with the financial restrictions imposed by the second apron. There have been other teams mentioned in connection with Davis, and some of those scenarios at least make more sense from a strategic standpoint. Chicago, for example, stands out as a team that could rationalize taking a swing, given their long-term flexibility and the way future contracts line up. Even then, it is a calculated risk rather than an obvious solution. For Golden State, however, the cost would be enormous. Contract matching alone would require sacrificing multiple rotation players, and that is before even talking about draft picks. Giving up that much for someone who has only appeared in a limited number of games this season would be a gamble bordering on reckless. That is why the Warriors' actual needs point in a different direction. Size is clearly an issue, but it does not necessarily require chasing the biggest name on the market. Players who can protect the rim, rebound consistently, and fit within the existing system would do far more to stabilize the roster. There are options around the league who bring toughness and reliability without demanding the kind of haul that would gut the team. Those are the moves that tend to pay off in the long run, especially when paired with a core that is still capable of competing at a high level. Meanwhile, the bigger star everyone keeps circling back to is Giannis Antetokounmpo, and for understandable reasons. His competitive fire is still burning, and his frustration with falling short of true contention has been evident. Even though he already has a championship, the desire for another one is clearly driving him. The challenge, of course, is that most teams are hesitant to empty the cupboard for a short-term window, particularly with the hard cap looming over every decision. Miami and New York both have reasons to hesitate, whether it is preserving young talent or maintaining roster balance. That hesitation is what keeps Golden State in the conversation, even if it feels unrealistic on the surface. The Bucks are not obligated to move Giannis, but waiting too long risks losing leverage. Trading him at the deadline could bring back a meaningful package and send him to a situation where winning immediately is still possible. For the Warriors, that kind of move would represent a true all-in moment, sacrificing youth and picks for one last championship push around Stephen Curry. It is a massive decision, and one that highlights how unresolved issues from the offseason are still lingering as the calendar turns. All of this, however, exists alongside the reality of the next game on the schedule. Brooklyn presents an opportunity for Golden State to reset, refocus, and get back in the win column. The Nets are clearly prioritizing future assets, even if they remain competitive on a night-to-night basis. That mindset can make games unpredictable because young teams often play loose and fearless. Golden State cannot afford to underestimate that, especially given how thin the rotation already is. A strong performance would go a long way toward restoring momentum and reinforcing the idea that the recent stretch is trending in the right direction. What makes the upcoming matchup even more interesting is how much it says about where Golden State really is right now. This stretch of games has quietly become a measuring stick, not just in terms of wins and losses, but in how the team manages adversity, fatigue, and expectations. After a physically draining game that went into overtime, the turnaround is quick, and that is where discipline and preparation matter. The Warriors cannot afford to come out flat or mentally disengaged, especially against an opponent that has nothing to lose and everything to prove on a given night. Brooklyn may not be positioned as a contender, but that does not mean they lack talent or pride. Teams in that situation often play their best basketball when expectations are low. They push the pace, take confident shots, and challenge favorites in ways that can catch them off guard. For Golden State, this game is not about style points. It is about execution, controlling the tempo, and avoiding the lapses that have haunted them throughout the month. December exposed some uncomfortable truths about consistency, particularly on the defensive end and in late-game situations, and those issues do not disappear just because the calendar flips. One of the biggest areas to watch is how the Warriors handle the minutes distribution. Stephen Curry continuing to log extremely heavy workloads is not a sustainable formula, no matter how elite he is. The coaching staff has to find ways to steal rest without sacrificing competitiveness. That might mean trusting younger players in critical stretches or adjusting offensive responsibilities so everything does not flow through one player every possession. The long season demands balance, and the teams that figure that out early are usually the ones still standing when the games truly matter. Another layer to this conversation is the ongoing uncertainty surrounding Jonathan Kuminga. His absence continues to loom large, not just because of his athleticism, but because of what he represents for the future of the roster. The organization invested heavily in his development, and there was a clear expectation that this season would be a turning point. Instead, everything feels paused, leaving the Warriors in a strange in-between state where they are still relying heavily on veterans while waiting for younger pieces to fully emerge. That limbo affects roster decisions, rotations, and even trade discussions, because clarity is hard to find without seeing how all the pieces fit together. Speaking of trades, the rumor mill continues to churn, and it has become almost impossible to separate realistic possibilities from pure speculation. What stands out most is how disconnected some of the narratives feel from the actual needs of the team. Golden State does not need a headline-grabbing move for the sake of attention. They need solutions that address specific weaknesses, particularly rebounding, interior defense, and bench stability. Those problems do not require sacrificing the entire foundation of the roster. They require smart, targeted decisions that complement the system rather than disrupt it. The league as a whole is adjusting to a new financial reality, and that shift cannot be ignored. The era of stacking stars at any cost is fading, replaced by a renewed emphasis on depth, versatility, and durability. Teams that ignore that trend often find themselves stuck with bloated payrolls and limited flexibility. Golden State is walking a fine line, trying to maximize the remaining prime years of its core, while avoiding moves that could cripple the franchise long-term. That balance is delicate, and it makes every rumor, every report, and every hypothetical trade feel heavier than it might have in previous seasons. At the same time, the competitive fire within the locker room has not disappeared. Veterans like Draymond Green and Jimmy Butler thrive in moments when doubts start creeping in. These are players who understand how quickly narratives can change with a few strong performances. One solid stretch can flip the conversation from concern to confidence, especially in a conference where the standings are tightly packed. That is why the response to this recent loss matters more than the loss itself. How the Warriors play over the next few games will say far more about their trajectory than one overtime defeat ever could. There's also something to be said about the mental toughness required to brush off games like the one against Toronto. When an opponent delivers a historic individual performance, frustration can linger if it is not properly processed. The best teams acknowledge it, learn from it, and move on without carrying emotional baggage into the next matchup. Golden State has been through enough battles over the years to know that lesson well. The challenge now is applying it with a roster that looks very different from those championship runs. Looking ahead, the schedule does not get any easier. Each game presents a new test, whether it is a rebuilding team playing loose or a contender looking to make a statement. That reality puts pressure on every possession, every rotation decision, and every adjustment. There is little margin for error, especially when depth is already stretched thin. That makes internal development just as important as any external move. Players stepping into expanded roles have to be ready, because there will be nights when the margin between winning and losing comes down to effort and awareness rather than star power. Before we continue, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any exclusive Dubs updates. Let's keep going. Whispers around the league grew louder as word circulated that the Warriors had reached an agreement to acquire Michael Porter Jr., a move that, while described in some corners as official, still carries the texture of a deal shaped by late momentum and sudden conviction. Sources close to the situation suggest that only hours earlier, Porter Jr.'s camp had been hesitant, weighing fit, role, and long-term visibility. Then something shifted. The Warriors' pitch, according to people familiar with the talks, was less about numbers and more about context. The promise of structure, spacing, and a system designed to amplify shooting wings appears to have resonated. There is talk that Porter Jr. was shown detailed plans outlining how his scoring gravity could thrive alongside elite playmaking, freeing him from the burden of force creation while still preserving his identity as a primary threat. For a player often scrutinized for consistency and health, the message was one of clarity and protection. Another factor quietly mentioned is timing. With the market tightening and alternative scenarios losing appeal, the Warriors' offer gained urgency. League insiders speculate that Porter Jr. became convinced this was the moment to embrace a recalibration rather than chase a louder headline elsewhere. The appeal of a franchise known for maximizing skill sets, even for players arriving with questions attached, reportedly carried significant weight. There is also belief that veteran voices played a role. Conversations with respected figures around the game, some with ties to the Bay Area, may have helped frame the move not as a gamble, but as an opportunity to redefine perception. In that light, the last-hour change of heart feels less impulsive and more like a calculated leap. If the agreement holds as expected, the Warriors add a scorer whose ceiling has always intrigued executives, while Porter Jr. steps into an environment that could simplify his path. For now, the league watches closely, aware that sometimes the most decisive moments happen quietly, just before the noise begins. Stay updated exclusively with the latest Dub Nation news. Subscribe to our channel and hit the like button to keep getting daily updates on the Warriors. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your input is essential for the Dubs community. Stay tuned for the next video.